Hey guys, it's Hunter here. Welcome back to my channel. I hope you guys are excited for today's video. Today's video is going to be part 2 to my Susan Bailey murder case. I actually uploaded part 1, or it's uploading right now as I'm about to film this, but they're going to go up within a day of each other, I think. So hopefully you watched part 1. If you haven't, I will link that video down below. But that's going to tell you a little bit about the history and everything leading up to the murder. And then today, or right now in this video, I'm going to discuss the murders and the repercussions that came with the murder for these 4 teenagers and also Susan Bailey herself. So I hope you guys enjoy these type of videos. If you do, make sure to give it a thumbs up and don't forget to click the subscribe button down below and join our family so you can stay tuned for more creepy videos. And with that, let's get on into this video. Ended on the last video, these 4 kids each had a different plan on how they were going to kill their parents. So starting out with Marilee. Marilee's plan was she was going to stab her mother in her sleep. So this was the night. They were supposed to leave on Tuesday, so September 23rd. So on Tuesday, September 23rd of 2008, Marilee White was going to stab her mother. And it just so happened that her mother woke up to see her daughter standing over her with a knife. And her mother actually retaliated and got her to put down the knife, and it ended up calling 911. They ended up getting into a fight, and Marilee eventually got taken away to a juvenile center where she remained for the next few days. And so then Paul's plan was he was going to wait at his house, and once his parents got home, he was going to shoot them. But it just so happened that his parents decided to stay in town later and go to dinner and a movie, so they didn't come home in time, and his plan fell through as well. So then they were going to continue on together with the murder of Susan Bailey. Now they did wait a little bit. Their plan was to leave on Tuesday, but once they found the news that Marilee had gotten caught, they thought that maybe she was going to spill and that they were going to get in trouble. So they waited a couple of days. Then on Thursday, September 25th, 2008, they had their plan set and ready. So as Susan went off to her job, as she did every day to provide for her family, the children were at home planning so many different ways to kill her. They had pudding that was poisoned, it had crushed up painkillers in it, they had knives ready, they had a bat ready, they had an electrical cord hanging from the bathtub ready to electrocute her. They were ready to kill her at any turn that it came to. So it was on the night of Thursday, September 25th, that Susan Bailey left her second job in Fort Worth and drove the 30-minute drive back to her home at 11:30 p.m. When she got home, she also, let me skip back a little bit. The whole day, Susan had been trying to contact her children. She had been calling them multiple times. She had been seeing if they were at school. They hadn't been at school that day. And she was very concerned because her children weren't answering their phone. She was worried because she didn't know where they were. So when she got home, she found all the lights off in the house, and she found that very odd. She thought, well, maybe the kids went to bed, but that still wasn't like her children. So she was very confused. She didn't know what was going on. So when she got home, she came inside the door. She saw the laundry and everything that still hadn't been done. All the lights were off downstairs. She had no idea what was going on. And also they had tried to use the pudding like a day earlier, and she had taken one bite of it and she said, no, it tastes weird, I don't like it. So it was still sitting on the counter. So she walks through the kitchen, she sees that pudding still sitting there, all the dishes that need to be done. She begins to head upstairs to check and see if her children are in their room. And once she gets to the top of the stairs, Paul is waiting. He jumps out, grabs her by the throat and pins her against the wall and begins stabbing her multiple times. As this begins happening, of course, Susan begins screaming, and out comes Jennifer, and Susan tells Jennifer, call 911, call 911. Jennifer looks her mother in the eye and says no, and begins stabbing her as well. And also out comes David Bailey, who's only 14 at the time, and begins stabbing his mother as well. And they eventually kill her. She falls to the ground as she's still trying to beg for help, and she's gurgling on her own blood, trying to get her children to stop killing her, until eventually she is on the floor dead. Now after all this happens, the kids try to clean up their mess. They had David purchase some cheap cleaner from Walmart. They threw all the knives, they threw all their phones in the bathtub trying to hide all this evidence. So the cops did find evidence that they tried to clean it up. They tried to use the soap. Paul actually ended up cutting his hair off to try to change his appearance and everything, but it was very rushed and you could tell they hadn't thought this through. So after they killed Susan, they left their mother on the floor and went outside. They stole her car and decided to plan their trip, drive their trip to Canada. No. And let alone they did not pack any clothes. They didn't have any suitcases. They didn't have any food. They didn't have anything. But they tied themselves and they took the family dog with them. So they continued driving on, and it was at 3 a.m. that morning that they actually were found in Yankton, South Dakota at a gas station where they were trying to steal gas, see if any of the pumps were still running where they could get free gas because they were running out of gas and they had no money, obviously. So a detective, let me see who it was. I have like all this. Detective Eric Kolda, who was a detective in Yankton, South Dakota, saw these kids wandering around trying to get gas, and also in Yankton they had a curfew for the teenagers of 11 p.m. So obviously these teenagers were out way past the curfew. So he decides to go up and talk to them. So he goes up to talk to them and they said, oh, we're on a trip to our grandparents' house in Minnesota, which they do have grandparents that live in Minnesota. But Detective Kolda just knew that something was off about these kids. He knew that something wasn't right because these kids had no luggage. They were obviously super young, and also Paul, who was driving, only had a driver's permit and it was very, very new. So he was very confused. Also, why would they be trying to steal gas at 3 a.m.? So he takes them down to the station and is holding them on a curfew breaking charge while he can try to figure out what's going on. He does check their driver's license and sees that it is from Texas, so he decides to look them up. He sees that Paul is actually reported as a runaway, and so he ends up contacting the police in Roanoke. And he ends up talking to many detectives. I believe it was Brian Peterson who was kind of talking to Detective Kolda about these children, and they were trying to figure out if something was fishy. Now at this time, it had been a few days later from the murder, and Susan Bailey's mother had started to notice that her daughter was gone. Now her mother was still in Minnesota, but she was receiving calls from Susan's work saying that Susan hadn't showed up to work in the last 2 days. And that was so not like Susan. If she was going to be gone, she would especially call in, but she was never gone because she worked her butt off every single day for her children. She never missed a day of work, so it was so unlike her. And Susan's mother just had a sense that something was wrong with her daughter, and she kept calling the police in Roanoke and telling them to go check. The police would go there. They'd say the lights were off, the car was gone, that maybe they had gone on a spontaneous vacation and just forgot to tell the family. And Sharon's mother knew that that was not the case. She knew that something was off. So when these kids were caught in Yankton, South Dakota, Brian Peterson, the detective in Roanoke, knew that something was a little fishy. So they decided to actually go investigate the Bailey house and see what was going on. So they ended up breaking into the house, and what they found upstairs was horrifying. They found Susan Bailey face down at the top of her stairs in the hallway, completely laying in her own blood. She had been sitting for days. The house reeked of death. The carpet was crusted and sodden with all of Susan's blood. There was blood on the walls that had been sprayed from them slashing her throat. They found a bathtub with a knife and the 3 cell phones in it. They found a baseball bat on the bed. They found the poison pudding. They found all the way these kids had left everything that they had been planning, and it was just crazy what they had done. They found a knife under Jennifer's bed. They found a hair and electrical cord in the bathtub and multiple stab wounds all over Susan's body. So they actually contacted Susan's mother and let her know that her daughter was in fact dead and that they were investigating, and they were pretty sure that it was her children. Because the children were gone, they found hair which they connected to be Paul's, and they knew that these children were up to something, and the police had known that there was a lot of tension going on at the Bailey house, and so they knew that something wasn't right. On to the scene. So obviously they hired a medical examiner. It was Sharon Bauman of Roanoke or Denton, Texas, and she came to investigate the body and do the autopsy. So when they did the autopsy, they found on Susan's body she had 24 stab wounds and 2 slashes to her throat. She was still wearing her Bed Bath & Beyond name tag from work. Her cervical spine was fractured, her spinal cord was cut, and she had a fractured larynx. Her left carotid artery and her jugular vein were both cut. Her head was barely still attached. They had almost completely beheaded her from the amount of times that she was stabbed. She was stabbed 26 times. Now on the certain back of her body and on their neck, they found deep, super ugly, rageful wounds. They were deep, they were done with strength, and they assumed that these were the wounds that were most likely inflicted by Paul. On the front side, they found wounds that were not as deep but were still stab wounds, and they assumed these to be the wounds that Jennifer produced. And then on the left side, there were wounds that were barely more than scratches, which they believed to be David's, as he didn't really want to harm his mom, but he was in this and he was just as guilty as the rest of them. But with Jennifer, you could sense, you could tell the hesitance in the wounds that she inflicted. And so once they found her body, they knew that the children had something to do with it, so the detectives from Texas ended up driving up to South Dakota, taking the children back and charging them with capital murder. And in the beginning, they tried to say that they had no idea what was going on, that they were just going to their grandparents' house, and that their mom had gotten into a fight with her boyfriend, that it had to be something with the boyfriend. They tried to come up with all these stories to cover it up, but the police were not falling for this. Then Paul said that he had no involvement in the murders, that he was just pawned into it. He did nothing. He was just with Jennifer. And so they ended up finding evidence, his hair and his fingerprints to connect him to the murders, and they knew that he was involved anyways. So they were all involved in this murder. They ended up taking to jail, going on trial for everything, and to this day Jennifer still doesn't admit that it was her. She changes her plans, changes her story all the time about if she did it, if she didn't, who was involved, and whatever. They all thought that it was just going to be fine. They were just going to run away to Canada and they were going to live their lives happily ever after, and they were never going to have to deal with the repercussions of anything that they did that night to their mother. And so they were taken back to Texas, where they went through the charges. Susan's mother came down. They had to clean everything out of the house, sell everything. The dog that was with them ended up getting sent to the pound and was never picked up again, so we don't know what happened to the dog. That's like breaks my heart. And the dad refused to believe that his children would do something, and he was still on the side of their children. And Susan's mother, their grandmother, really faced an internal struggle inside herself, because these were her grandchildren and they had killed her daughter, and she didn't know how to process that, because all she could think about was her sweet grandchildren that she'd known all her life, and how could they do something, and she never really could forgive them for what they did to her daughter, which is totally understandable. And so with these charges, once they had collected all the evidence and they knew that they were all three involved in the murders, Jennifer had turned 18 6 days after the murder took place. Her and Paul were charged as adults, and David was obviously charged as a juvenile offender. And when Jennifer was asked, you know, why would you do this, she just said, me and my mom, we didn't see eye to eye. And that's all she had to say about why she killed her mother. That's all she had to say. So for the charges, Jennifer and Paul Henson were indicted for capital murder, which is first-degree murder in the state of Texas. And David was in the Denton Juvenile Center, and then on June 9th of 2009, Paul submitted a confession and pled guilty to a reduced charge of murder. So he is now facing a 60-year sentence, and he is in the Mark W. Stiles unit in Jefferson County. His release date is set for September 26th of 2068, and he will be eligible for parole on September 26th of 2038. Jennifer also pled to a reduced sentence of 60 years, and she's in the Mountainville unit in Gatesville, and her sentence will be up in 2068. David, he pled guilty to a 26-year determinate statement, which is what they give you in the juvenile facilities. And once he turned 18, they would reevaluate his case in front of a judge and decide if he needed to continue his sentence or go free. So in 2013, David turned 18, and they ruled that he would continue in jail until he completed his sentence. So he now resides in the Clemens unit in Brazoria County, Texas. His release date is set for October 7th of 2034, and he will come up for parole in 2021. So his parole is coming up, although many of the officers related to the case have said that they believe none of them will be eligible for parole, and they will continue out their sentence in jail. So, and then I also wrote down all the investigators and the policemen that were involved in this case, so I thought I would list them off just because they deserve some honor. So Sharon Bauman was the medical examiner, Texas Ranger Tracy Murphy, Sheriff's Detective Larry Kish, Roanoke Detective Brian Peterson, Crime Scene Investigator Jeff Coates, Detective in Yankton, South Dakota, Eric Kolda, the Roanoke Police Chief Gary Johnson, Patrol Sergeant George Wise, and the Justice of the Peace Mike Bateman. They all played a part in this case in helping solve this murder and helping bring Susan Bailey's family to justice. And so, yes, they are residing out their cases, and Susan's mom actually did write back and forth with Jennifer while she was in jail, and Jennifer sometimes would be angry and hateful and say she wasn't sorry for the murder, and other times she would say sorry that she'd found God, that she was finding herself and bettering herself, and that God had forgiven her. Also, it was reported that when she was first in prison, she would sit in the corner and cry and cry and cry all day, and someone would ask her what was wrong, and she'd say, "I miss my mom, I want to go home." And it's so hard to think how these people think, because she literally thought that, oh, everything was just going to be fine, she could just go back home, and she didn't get that she killed her mother, and she was not going home because she didn't have a home. She literally killed her mother, and she had a false reality of just being able to live out with her boyfriend. It just shows how crazy teenagers are and how they think they can just do whatever and live this happy life and not deal with any of the consequences. This case just really gets me really fired up and just interests me so much, and it's so crazy how all this comes about. And yeah, this happened about 2 hours away from where I live, so it's just crazy. But yeah, I'm glad that Susan was brought to justice, and these kids will now live their life out in jail where they deserve to be. So yes, that is the end of the murder of Susan Bailey. So just wanted to read this case to you guys, let you guys know. I wanted to shed some light on the case because it's so interesting to me, just so upsetting. And so yeah, there is actually a book that goes into great detail where I got a lot of my information from, called Let's Kill Mom. I'm going to link it down below. It's a great read. It goes into so much detail on the murder and the investigation, everything that went into it. So that's a really, really good story. And I will leave some links below with some information if you guys want to read about a little bit more and kind of get your own research if you wish. But yes, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you guys enjoyed hearing this case. If you did, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, and I'll see you guys all in my next video. Bye, guys.